Welcome to the deep dive. Grab a seat, get comfortable, because today we are venturing into some incredibly profound territory.
We really are.
If you look around at the world today, it is just so easy to feel overwhelmed, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
You turn on the news, you scroll through your feed, and there's this pervasive sense of despair about the trajectory of humanity.
Yeah, a real heaviness.
Right. It often feels like we are stuck on a treadmill of the same broken systems. But today, we are setting our sights on something completely different. We are looking at a framework that was explicitly designed to offer a genuinely optimistic, futuristic alternative.
A real breath of fresh air, honestly.
Truly, we are exploring a philosophical and socioeconomic vision for a humanity that is desperately seeking hope, seeking justice, and, trying to figure out a way to build a world that actually works for everyone.
And every living thing.
Yes, every living thing. And we have an absolutely fascinating piece of source material on the table to guide us through this today.
We certainly do. It's a text that really forces you to zoom way, way out.
Totally.
It asks you to step back and look at the entire chessboard of human history, human psychology, and human organization all at once.
That is the perfect way to describe it. Our source today consists of excerpts from a lecture delivered on January 15th, 1990.
Calcutta, India.
Right, in Calcutta. The speaker was Shrii Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar, and the lecture itself is titled The God-Centered Path. Beyond Dogma, Matter, and Self.
A very ambitious title.
Very. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack Sarkar's bold, sweeping predictions about global socioeconomic systems. We really want to understand how he diagnoses the world's ailments.
And more importantly, the cure.
Exactly. We are going to explore his proposed panacea. We're going to look closely at his ultimate solution to these systemic problems, a dual concept he calls PROUT, progressive utilization theory, and Neohumanism.
Now, before we jump into the deep end, it is absolutely vital that we establish some ground rules for today's discussion.
Yeah, that's important.
Because we are dealing with some very heavy, very contentious themes here.
For sure.
The source material we are examining is incredibly robust, and it contains some very strong, politically and philosophically charged critiques.
He does not hold back.
No, he doesn't. Sarkar heavily critiques capitalism. He heavily critiques communism and Marxism. And perhaps most controversially, he presents a very uncompromising, razor-sharp critique of world religions. Okay. So I want to assure you, the listener, right up front, our role here is not to take political sides.
Definitely not.
We are not here to endorse capitalism, communism, or any specific religious or anti-religious viewpoints.
We're neutral ground today.
Exactly.
Oh.
Our goal is strictly to be your impartial guides. We are going to impartially report and analyze the original author's framework so that we can all understand his overarching, optimistic vision for the future.
Well said.
We're examining his ideas as a fascinating lens through which to view human history and our collective potential.
That is a crucial disclaimer to keep in mind as we navigate this. We are looking at this as a thought experiment and a historical text.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Sarkar begins his lecture in a way that I found, honestly, genuinely surprising.
Oh, how he doesn't start with the socioeconomic.
Right. He doesn't start with politics. He doesn't start with economics. He doesn't even start with theology. He starts with the very baseline physical reality of the universe.
It's so foundational.
It is. He starts with the absolute law of nature, which he identifies as diversity.
Diversity.
Right. He makes this foundational premise. No two entities in this universe are equal in all respects.
None.
Identity, meaning exact perfect sameness, is simply impossible. It is fundamentally a universe of varieties.
What's fascinating here is why he chooses to start with that specific premise.
Yeah, why do you think he does that?
Well, think about it. If your ultimate goal is to deconstruct massive global systems like capitalism or communism, why begin with the concept of biological and physical diversity?
It seems disconnected at first glance.
Right, but he does it because it immediately, right out of the gate, sets the stage for rejecting any and all one-size-fits-all dogmas.
Ah, I see.
If no two leaves on a tree are exactly the same, if no two human fingerprints are the same, if our psychological makeups are entirely unique,
then demanding uniformity is unnatural.
Exactly. Any philosophy, any economic system, or any social structure that demands absolute uniformity is fundamentally at odds with the physical universe.
It goes against the grain of reality itself.
It really does.
It really grounds his entire argument. He's essentially saying, before we even talk about human ideas, let's look at how the universe actually operates.
That's a great starting point.
And from this physical reality of innate diversity, He moves immediately into human psychology. He says that any theory, any proposition, or any hypothesis must not go against human psychology.
And he brings up rationality here.
He does. He highlights what he calls one of the greatest treasures of human beings, rationality. According to Sarkar, anything that goes against human rationality, anything that tries to suppress it, is bound to be eventually destroyed.
Exactly. Human rationality is framed here almost like a natural force, like gravity.
You can't escape it.
You can try to defy it, but eventually it wins.
I kept thinking of a very practical analogy while reading this part.
Oh, share it.
Imagine you have a thick wooden board with a perfectly round hole carved into it,
Okay.
and you have a square peg. Now, if you are a powerful regime, you have a hammer.
A very big hammer.
Right. And if you hit that square peg hard enough and for long enough, you might actually be able to smash it into the round hole.
You can force it.
You can force it. But what happens to the materials?
The wood splinters.
The wood splinters. The peg is severely damaged. There is immense constant friction.
Yeah, the integrity is ruined.
Exactly. And eventually, under that sustained unnatural pressure, the whole structure weakens, rots, and falls apart.
That's a great way to visualize it.
Trying to force inherently diverse, rational human beings into irrational, dogmatic, uniform systems is exactly like smashing that square peg.
History shows us that regimes certainly have used force for decades, sometimes centuries, to maintain that structure.
Absolutely.
But eventually, because it goes against the round hole of human rationality and natural diversity, it will inevitably be destroyed. The friction is simply too great.
That is a highly illustrative way to look at it. Rationality, in his view, is almost like an immune system for the collective human mind.
An immune system, yeah.
You can suppress an immune system for a while.
Yeah.
You can suppress rationality with fear or with physical force or with generations of repetitive conditioning.
But it doesn't die.
No, the innate human capacity to observe, to reason, and to question never actually goes away entirely. It is a treasure that is hardwired into us.
So eventually, that rational immune system will wake up and reject the foreign body of an irrational philosophy.
Precisely. And this foundational understanding of diversity and rationality perfectly sets up the core architecture of his entire lecture.
It's the launch pad.
Having established that irrational systems must eventually fall, Sarkar categorizes all human philosophies into 4 distinct types.
Okay.
He diagnoses the ailments of the world by looking at the first 3, which he explicitly calls defective philosophies.
Defective. Strong word.
And then he offers his 4th, which is the genuine alternative. But the 3 defective ones are dogma-centered, matter-centered, and self-centered.
Let's break those down one by one. And we really need to take our time here because his definitions are incredibly sharp. And frankly, some of them are highly provocative.
Very.
Let's start with the first defective philosophy on his list, dogma-centered philosophy.
Okay, lay it on us.
Now, in the text, Sarkar makes a sweeping, deeply controversial claim. He states that all religions are dogma-centered.
All of them.
All of them. He argues that they rely fundamentally on wrong sentiments and foolish ideas.
No, wait a minute. All of them.
I know.
That is an incredibly vast generalization. How does he justify lumping every single global faith with all their diverse traditions and mystical practices into one giant category of dogma?
It is a massive claim, and it is meant to be provocative.
Clearly.
To understand his justification, we have to look at how he defines the motive behind dogma-centered philosophies.
The motive.
Right. He is not necessarily attacking the individual spiritual seeker's personal experience of the divine. What he is attacking is the institutionalized, philosophical framework of organized religion.
The structures.
Exactly. He claims that the ultimate motive of dogma-centered philosophy is, unequivocally, exploitation in the name of providence.
Exploitation.
He specifically points out how proponents of dogma will claim to have an exclusive pipeline to the divine.
Like a direct line to God.
They will say, I had a dream, or God appeared to me and commanded me to do this specific work, or this text is the direct, unquestionable word of the Creator.
So it is about the weaponization of the divine.
Precisely. According to Sarkar, this is a mechanism, a highly effective one, used as a pretext to exploit others to the fullest extent.
That makes a lot of sense when you look at history.
Think about the power dynamic. If I can convince you that the ultimate creator of the universe, the supreme authority, commands you to give me your resources or your labor or your absolute obedience,
You've won.
I have achieved the ultimate unshakable form of control.
Because it's divine.
Because it is divine, you cannot rationally question it. If you question me, you are questioning God. That is the dogma.
And he certainly does not shy away from the historical cost of this mechanism.
Not at all.
The text explicitly states that dogma-centered philosophies have been responsible for the greatest blood bags in human history.
That is an undeniable historical reality.
When you have two groups, and both groups firmly, dogmatically believe that their completely contradictory divine revelations are the absolute infallible truth.
Compromise is impossible.
It's mathematically impossible. You can't negotiate with a divine mandate. And so conflict, often violent, bloody conflict, becomes inevitable. It is a very heavy diagnosis, but he lays it out as the first major defect in human organization.
And from there, he moves to the second defective philosophy, matter-centered philosophy.
Right. And in his 1990 framework, matter-centered corresponds heavily to communism and Marxism, as well as extreme materialism in general.
Okay.
He says the central motive here is the enjoyment of material objects at any cost.
He is talking about a worldview where the physical, the material, and the economic are the only realities.
The only things that matter.
Right. There is no spiritual dimension, no higher consciousness to consider.
Exactly. And the text makes a striking assertion here. It says that this purely matter-centered mindset is what created the atom bomb.
Wow.
It is a philosophy where material dominance and physical power are the ultimate goals, and its proponents will resort to brute force to exploit others or secure resources whenever it suits their purpose.
It strips away the human element.
Completely. It strips away the human element and reduces everything to matter and force.
And Sarkar makes a very specific, incredibly sharp critique of communism here.
Let's hear it.
He defines communism not just as matter-centered, but as an unhappy blending of matter-centered and dogma-centered brutality.
An unhappy blending.
That freezing, unhappy blending is a crucial distinction to unpack.
How so? How is a notoriously anti-religious system like communism blending with dogma?
Because he is looking at the mechanics of the system, not just the labels.
Oh, the underlying structure.
Right. He is arguing that communism took the materialistic goal, the focus purely on physical matter, state power, and economic resource distribution.
Okay.
But it enforced that goal using the exact same psychological weapons as a dogmatic religion.
That is fascinating.
Think about it. The state became the infallible deity.
The political text became the unquestionable scriptures.
Exactly. It demanded absolute, unquestioning faith in the party line. It aggressively punished heretics and dissidents.
Just like the Inquisition.
Just like it. And it relied on a very rigid, inflexible doctrine. It was, in his words, a theory of brutality that completely failed to serve humanity, precisely because it was just a new flavor of dogma applied to material ends.
That makes perfect sense. It's replacing one infallible authority with another, but the suppression of human rationality remains exactly the same.
The round hole, the square peg.
Always the square peg.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the third defective philosophy on his list, self-centered philosophy.
Right.
Sarkar aligns this primarily with capitalism, and the defining characteristic here is exactly what it sounds like. Everything is done only for individual selfishness and self-pleasure.
It's all about the individual.
But to explain how this functions on a societal level, he introduces a concept in the text that I found absolutely brilliant.
The radius.
Yes, the psychic radius.
The psychic radius is one of the most useful analytical tools in this entire lecture.
It really is. So for you listening, visualize a circle.
Okay, visualize it.
You are standing directly in the center of that circle.
Right.
The radius of that circle, the distance from you to the edge, represents how far your care, your empathy, your sense of responsibility, and your true concern extend outward into the world.
The limit of your empathy.
Exactly. In a self-centered philosophy, no matter how big that radius might initially appear to be in different spheres of life, the core motive always, inevitably, bends back to individual selfishness.
Let's expand on that because it is so relevant.
Please.
If you are operating under a self-centered philosophy, your radius might extend just to yourself.
The smallest circle possible.
Or maybe it extends a bit further to your immediate family, or perhaps it extends to your business partners or your shareholders or even your specific nation.
Okay.
But the ultimate gravitational pull at the center of that radius is always your own benefit, your own profit, your own security.
Exactly. Everything serves the center. And we really need to look at what that actually does to a society.
It breaks it.
The text tells us exactly what happens when everyone operates this way. It balkanizes human society.
Balkanizes.
It fragments us into competing factions. It creates vast differences and disparities. And you can see this balkanization everywhere today, perhaps even more clearly than in 1990.
Oh, Without a doubt.
Think about the modern phenomena we are dealing with right now. Think about the billionaire space races.
Right, the perfect example.
You have individuals with so much concentrated wealth that they are literally building rockets to leave the planet, while millions of people on the ground don't have access to clean water.
That is a psychic radius that has shrunk to the size of a single ego.
Exactly. Despite having the resources to impact the entire globe.
That is a perfect modern application of the concept. Or look at the digital world. Look at social media echo chambers.
Oh, man. Yes.
The algorithms are designed by self-centered, profit-driven motives to feed us only what keeps us engaged, which usually means anger and division.
It balkanizes our reality.
It completely does. We are placed into tiny, isolated digital silos where we only interact with people who think exactly like us.
If my psychic radius doesn't reach you, and your psychic radius doesn't reach me,
we are in a state of constant, subtle, and sometimes overt competition rather than cooperation.
We become isolated islands of self-interest, fiercely defending our tiny radii against everyone else.
It creates a society of incredible anxiety and isolation.
It really does. So we have the diagnosis, we have these three defective systems, the psychological exploitation of dogma, the brutal, forceful materialism of matter, and the fragmenting, isolating nature of self.
The trifecta of dysfunction.
Exactly. Now, let's place ourselves in the historical context of when Sarkar was speaking. It is January 15th, 1990.
Such an important date.
This context is absolutely paramount to understanding the urgency of his message. The Berlin Wall had literally just fallen a couple months prior.
November '89.
Right. The Soviet Union is rapidly fracturing. It is on the brink of total collapse.
The geopolitical tectonic plates were shifting faster than anyone could comprehend.
Exactly. And Sarkar observes this landscape and notes that capitalism and communism have been moving side by side in the present world for decades, locked in the Cold War.
The two giants.
But he makes a sweeping declaration. He declares that both are dying.
Both of them.
Both. However, he makes a fascinating nuanced distinction about how they are dying. He says capitalism is dying a natural death, but communism died an unnatural death.
This is where his analysis gets highly specific.
I love this part.
He uses a very vivid, memorable analogy to explain the difference between a natural and an unnatural death of an ideology.
The drunkard analogy.
Yes, he uses the analogy of a drunkard.
I love this analogy because it makes a dense geopolitical theory so easily understandable.
It really paints a picture.
He says, imagine a man who drinks a heavy amount of alcohol consistently over a long period of time.
Okay.
Eventually, over decades, that man will contract liver disease, his organs will fail, and he will die.
Sad, but expected.
That is a natural trajectory. It is a natural death caused by long-term systemic decay from a toxic habit.
Right.
But, he says, if that same man drinks an excessive, impossible amount in one single day, say, he chugs 10 bottles of alcohol in a few hours, he dies immediately.
Instant system failure.
That is an unnatural, sudden, acute death.
What is so compelling is how he applies this 10 bottles concept to the sudden fall of communism.
How does he connect it?
According to Sarkar's logic, communism was fundamentally logically defective. Because it went against human rationality, it would have eventually died of liver disease.
A natural death, systemic decay.
Exactly, perhaps a few decades down the line. But it didn't. It died suddenly, unnaturally, seemingly overnight in the early 1990s.
The whole world watched it happen.
So the question is why? What were the 10 bottles of alcohol that caused this sudden, acute demise?
The text gives a very specific answer. It claims that communism's immediate cause of death, the fatal dose, its greatest blunder, was that it actively and aggressively attacked God-centered philosophy.
It didn't just ignore spirituality or secularize the state. It aggressively tried to suppress and eradicate the innate human spiritual sentiment.
Which goes back to human psychology.
Yes. By attacking something so deeply rooted in the human psyche.
Yeah.
Remember, we talked about going against human psychology. It created a massive, unsustainable backlash that accelerated its own destruction exponentially.
It drank the 10 bottles.
It drank the 10 bottles.
But this sudden, unnatural death creates a massive, immediate problem for the world.
A huge problem.
Sarkar points out that communism, despite all its brutal defects, occupied a massive amount of space in the world.
Huge amounts.
It occupied vast physical territory across the globe. It occupied immense mental space in the minds of billions of people. And it occupied a huge amount of intellectual energy in academia and policy.
It was a monolith.
When it collapsed so suddenly, it didn't leave behind a peaceful utopia.
Not at all.
It left behind a vacuum A massive, gaping, ideological, mental, and physical vacuum.
And we all know the fundamental law of nature: a vacuum will always be filled.
Always.
Nature absolutely abhors a vacuum. And this is where Sarkar issues a very stern prophetic warning to his audience.
What does he say?
He says, if we sit idle in lethargy, if humanity just watches this massive geopolitical and ideological vacuum form and does nothing but celebrate the fall of the old regime,
Then what happens?
then what he calls demonic, non-spiritual theories will immediately rush in to occupy that space.
That is such a chilling warning, especially looking back at the last 30 years of history.
It is entirely accurate. The collapse of a bad system does not automatically guarantee that a good system will naturally, organically rise to replace it.
No, usually the worst people step up.
Usually the most ruthless, opportunistic forces are the first in line to grab power. The void will be filled by new, mutated forms of dogma or new forms of hypermaterialism or extreme oligarchic self-centeredness.
You have to actively, intentionally build the alternative or the vacuum will destroy you.
It really makes you realize that ideological battles aren't just won when the opponent falls.
Right.
They are won by what you have prepared to build in the empty space they leave behind.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Before Sarkar introduces what we should build in that vacuum, he takes a step back to examine the anatomy of the enemy.
The anatomy of dogma.
Specifically, the anatomy of dogma. Because if dogma is so logically defective, if it goes against human rationality, as we discussed with the square peg in the round hole.
Right, how does it survive?
How does it survive for so long? How do religions and dogmatic systems maintain their iron grip on humanity for centuries and even millennia?
He identifies several highly sophisticated mechanisms of control.
They're very sophisticated.
First, he notes that dogmatic systems are incredibly adaptable when it comes to self-preservation.
Like a virus.
Exactly. He says they survive by knowing exactly how to twist their teachings to deny the truth and adapt to changing circumstances. When science proves a dogmatic claim wrong, they don't fold, they shapeshift.
They move the goalpost.
They completely move the goalposts, they reinterpret the texts, or they claim the science is a test of faith.
It's remarkably resilient.
Secondly, he argues that their underlying unstated purpose is almost always to secure the interests, the wealth, and the power of a special privileged class.
The clergy.
The clergy, the elite, the ruling class that administers the dogma.
Follow the money, right.
Always. And thirdly, and this is the most insidious part, they survive by borrowing the language of genuine God-centered ideas.
They hijack the vocabulary of spirituality.
Precisely. They make irrational, dogmatic propositions about God, but they use the language of love, devotion, and salvation to sentimentalize people's minds deeply.
It's emotional manipulation.
They bypass the rational immune system entirely and go straight for deep-seated emotional and psychological vulnerabilities.
To achieve this bypass, the text outlines three main psychological weapons used by dogma-centered philosophies.
3 weapons.
They propagate stories, they write myths, and they share parables specifically engineered to create 3 distinct complexes in the human mind.
Okay, what are they?
First, superiority complexes. Second, inferiority complexes. And third, fear complexes.
Let's really look closely at those 3 weapons, because they are incredibly potent.
They're everywhere.
And they are used in almost every system of control. If you can convince one specific group of people that they are inherently superior to everyone else by divine decree, that they are the chosen ones, you buy their unwavering, fanatical loyalty.
Because who wants to give up being the chosen one?
No one. They will do anything to maintain that divine status.
Right.
If, simultaneously, you can convince another group of people that they are inherently inferior, that they are sinners or untouchables or cosmically lower, you break their will to resist.
You make them accept their own subjugation.
You make them accept their exploitation as the natural order of the universe.
And the third weapon binds it all together.
Yes, the fear complex.
If you can inject a baseline of fear into everyone, fear of eternal divine punishment, fear of the afterlife, fear of excommunication, fear of the other, you paralyze their rationality entirely.
A fearful mind cannot think critically.
It just can't. Sarkar doesn't just leave this as an abstract theory. He gives a very specific, stark, historical example from the text to illustrate exactly how this myth-making works.
He brings up the caste system, right?
Yes, he brings in the Hindu myth regarding the origin of the caste system. Now again, we were looking at his critique of these systems.
Impartially reporting.
Yes. He cites the specific myth that claims that different castes were born from different body parts of Parama Purusa, the supreme consciousness.
Right.
The myth states that the Brahmins, the priestly class, were born from the mouth of God. The Kshatriyas, the warriors, were born from the arms. The Vaishyas, the merchants, were born from the trunk. And the Shudras were born from the feet.
This is a textbook masterclass example of using myth to manufacture psychological complexes.
It really is.
If you are a Brahmin and you are told from the moment you can understand language that you emerged from the very mouth of the divine, a superiority complex is practically guaranteed.
You literally think you are the voice of God.
You are the voice of God. But look at the bottom of that hierarchy. Look at the feet.
Yeah.
Sarkar translates the word Shudra quite bluntly in his context as slaves of black complexion. He analyzes how this specific myth was engineered to inject both a crushing inferiority complex and a deep fear complex into the minds of the Shudras.
It tells them you are at the bottom because God put you there.
It is a dogmatic proposition designed entirely not for spiritual elevation, but for social control.
It is designed to secure the labor and subservience of one class to benefit a privileged class.
Exactly.
And he broadens this critique outward to encompass all world religions, pointing out what is perhaps the ultimate exclusivity dogma.
What is that?
The propagation of the idea that my God is the only true God and all other gods are false gods.
That simple sentence is the seed of so much human misery.
It really is. It is a proposition that instantly, violently creates an in-group and an out-group.
Us versus them.
Always. It creates a superiority complex for the believers and a fear complex regarding the non-believers, all wrapped into one neat dogmatic statement.
So we have the complete diagnosis now.
We do. We see the brutal physical defects of matter-centered communism. We see the balkanizing, fragmenting nature of self-centered capitalism. And we see the psychological weaponry of dogma-centered religion.
It's quite a bleak picture, frankly.
It is, and looming over all of this in 1990 is a massive ideological vacuum opening up in the world.
The empty space waiting to be filled.
This is the pivotal moment in the text where Sarkar shifts gears. He pivots from diagnosis to the cure. He introduces the genuine alternative, the fourth philosophy, God-centered philosophy.
And this is where the tone of the lecture completely transforms.
It's like the sun coming out.
It really is. It becomes incredibly expansive, optimistic, and forward-looking.
Remember the psychic radius we talked about earlier with self-centered philosophy?
Yes, the tiny circle.
Where the radius only points back to individual selfishness, maybe extending to a family or a corporation, but always pulling inward.
Right.
In a God-centered philosophy, the mechanics of that radius change completely. God, or the supreme consciousness, becomes the absolute nucleus at the center. And from that infinite center, the radius of selfless love expands outward, infinitely.
Infinitely.
It doesn't stop at your immediate family, doesn't stop at your national borders, it doesn't even stop at the boundary of the human species.
It just keeps going.
It expands to serve humanity and the entire living world with equal love and affection. This expanding radius is the core definition of Neohumanism.
Neohumanism is a truly beautiful evolution of philosophical thought.
It really is.
It states that true humanism, the love and care for humanity, is incomplete if it stops at humans.
That's a huge paradigm shift.
True humanism must include the plant world, the animal world, the entire ecological system of the planet.
Everything.
When your psychic radius expands that far, when you truly feel connected to the entire web of life, exploitation becomes logically and emotionally impossible.
You can't hurt it.
You cannot exploit, pollute, or destroy something that you perceive as an intimate extension of your own infinitely expanding radius of love. It fundamentally rewrites our relationship with the planet.
And because it rewrites that relationship, the text makes a stunning, absolute promise about this philosophy.
What's the promise?
It says, there can be no bloodbath in God-centered philosophy.
Wow.
Now, given human history, that sounds almost naive, right?
It sounds impossible.
But Sarkar explains the mechanics of why this is true. He says that human projection, our actions in the world, our societies, our conflicts, is merely the external reflection of an internal tranquility and composure.
It is the principle of as within, so without.
Exactly. If the internal state of a society, or the individuals within it, is genuinely tranquil, composed, and rooted in an expansive love for all beings, then the external projection of that society simply cannot be sanguinary or bloody clashes.
Because the friction is gone.
It is mathematically impossible within this framework. You cannot have a society at peace with the universe that is simultaneously slaughtering its neighbors.
He draws a very sharp contrast here to illustrate the different types of people operating in the world.
Tell us.
He says common human beings generally operate from a self-centered philosophy. Their radius is small.
Right.
But he talks about missionary workers, and he doesn't mean religious missionaries spreading dogma.
Right. Big distinction.
He means those dedicated to this expansive, selfless, neo-humanist path. He says these individuals are God-centered.
They embody the large radius.
Yes, and he defines their impact across the vast sweep of time. He says the selfless work done by God-centered people elevated humanity in the past. It is elevating humanity right now in the present, and it is the only thing that will continue to elevate humanity in the future.
But he notes, with a very clear-eyed sense of historical reality, that up until now, the world has not fully experienced a purely God-centered philosophy operating on a global scale.
And always in pockets.
We've had flashes of it, individuals who lived it, but never a global system built on it.
That is the massive gap that needs to be filled. That is the vacuum.
And here is the core thesis of the entire lecture, the moment we've been building toward.
The panacea.
Sarkar states unequivocally that to fill this vacuum, a specific framework is required. He says PROUT, progressive utilization theory, is the only panacea.
The only one.
PROUT, progressive utilization theory, is the comprehensive socioeconomic framework that must step forward to fill the global vacuum left by dying ideologies. He warns that if PROUT, progressive utilization theory, does not step in, a great catastrophe will take place as those defective, demonic, balkanizing philosophies rush back in to seize power.
Now, we really need to define what PROUT, progressive utilization theory, actually means in this context, because it's not just a buzzword.
It's an entire system.
How does it function as the socioeconomic application of Neohumanism?
That is the million-dollar question. Based on the framework we've just laid out, PROUT, progressive utilization theory, is the practical machinery of that infinitely expanding radius.
The practical machinery, I like that.
If capitalism balkanizes wealth for the self, and communism brutally controls matter for the state, PROUT, progressive utilization theory, is about the progressive utilization of all resources, physical, mental, and spiritual, for the maximum benefit and happiness of all living beings.
It is an economy of care.
Right. It implies a system where resources aren't hoarded by the few at the center of a tiny radius, but are distributed progressively.
It implies a rationality in how we interact with the Earth, utilizing resources without destroying the ecological balance that neo-humanism reveres.
It demands a socioeconomic structure that actively dismantles those superiority and inferiority complexes.
How does it do that?
By ensuring basic needs are met for everyone, thereby removing the fear complex that dogma thrives on.
It is the systemic, structural manifestation of love.
And Sarkar was observing this idea actually beginning to play out in real time in 1990.
It wasn't just hypothetical.
It wasn't just a theory in a book. He shared specific, hopeful anecdotes in the text to show the momentum building globally. For instance, he mentioned how President Tito allowed Ananda Marga, the global spiritual and social service organization that Sarkar himself founded, to work openly in Yugoslavia.
That was a huge deal back then.
Tito allowed this because he intimately understood the deep defects and the impending failure of the communist system he was a part of.
He also mentioned university students in Poland actively joining the movement.
Right.
He was seeing the ideas of PROUT, progressive utilization theory, and neo-humanism beginning to spread organically across the globe, particularly taking root in areas that had just suffered the unnatural, sudden death of matter-centered brutality.
The people who felt the friction the most.
The people in those regions had felt the friction of the square peg and the round hole acutely, and they were desperate for a rational, spiritually fulfilling alternative.
It is a moment of immense, palpable hope in the lecture. He literally speaks directly to his listeners and says, "This new day is yours."
A direct call to action.
It is a call to rise to the occasion. But, as we know, having a great theory, even a beautiful one like Neohumanism and PROUT, progressive utilization theory, is never enough on its own.
You need a battle plan.
You need a strategy. You need a way to implement it and counteract the deeply entrenched dogmas that have ruled the world for millennia. And Sarkar doesn't leave us hanging. He outlines a very specific twofold approach for securing this hopeful future.
The first part of his strategy is to aggressively and intentionally adopt the path of logic and reason.
Back to rationality.
Yes, and he is very specific about the primary tool for this, the spread of education. However, he adds a massive, crucial caveat to this point.
That's the caveat.
He says that merely attending a school or sitting in a university classroom memorizing facts will not necessarily have the desired effect. In fact, standard education can often just reinforce existing dogmas.
Exactly, teaching you what to think, not how to think.
Right. The education he is calling for must be specifically designed to produce a high degree of true rationality in the human mind.
And active rationality.
It must be an education that actively, surgically dismantles those superiority, inferiority, and fear complexes we discussed earlier.
It is the profound difference between teaching someone what to think, which is what dogma does, and teaching someone how to think critically.
That is the first step, fortifying the mind with logic and reason through the lens of PROUT, progressive utilization theory, and Neohumanism, so it becomes immune to dogmatic manipulation.
But logic alone isn't enough, which leads to the second part of the strategy. He says we must simultaneously inculcate spiritual sentiment.
Why both?
Because pure logic can be cold. It needs a heart. He argues that genuine spiritual sentiment is fundamentally more powerful and far more enduring than narrow religious sentiment.
I see.
Rationality and logic clear the mind of the weeds of dogma, but spiritual sentiment fills the heart with that infinitely expanding radius of love we talked about. You need both to build a society.
And he lays out a very clear stepwise battle plan for how this will unfold historically.
The sequence of events.
Yes. He asks his audience, what should our proper strategy be in the geopolitical arena? He says, first, humanity must vanquish the matter-centered philosophies.
Which was happening in 1990.
In 1990, he viewed this step as already happening. Communism was on the verge of extinction. The strategic logic here is profound. Once the brutal physical suppression of matter-centered systems is removed from the board, the strength of religious dogma will actually naturally weaken.
Wait, why would dogma weaken if its enemy falls? Wouldn't it get stronger?
It weakens because it loses its foil. It loses this opposite extreme that it uses to justify its own existence through fear.
Oh, that makes total sense.
If a dogma can no longer point to the godless communists as a terrifying threat, its fear complex loses power.
It has no boogeyman.
Exactly. And as that fear subsides, and as the dual strategy of rational education and spiritual sentiment takes root, the expanded consciousness of humanity will finally naturally eliminate dogma altogether.
It is a beautiful strategic vision. But to execute this battle plan, to be the ones who actually help spread PROUT, progressive utilization theory, and Neohumanism, Sarkar says we have to look inward first.
We can't change the world if we are broken ourselves.
We can't. He directly challenges the listener to overcome what he calls the 6 defects of human nature.
The 6 defects.
These are the internal obstacles to human progress. They are sleep, drowsiness, fear, anger, lethargy, and procrastination.
It is a fascinating, somewhat unexpected list.
Isn't it?
Fear and anger are obvious impediments to a society based on love and rationality, but sleep, drowsiness, lethargy, and procrastination.
I know, right? When I first read that, I joked to myself that it sounds exactly like my internal monologue on a Monday morning before I've had coffee.
A literal wake-up call.
But he's not just talking about physical tiredness, is he?
Not at all. He is talking about a profound mental and intellectual slumber.
The sleepwalking of society.
Exactly. When a massive vacuum appears in the world, the greatest danger is not necessarily the evil forces. The greatest danger is that good, rational people will simply be too lethargic to act.
I just sit there.
They will hit the snooze button on history. They will procrastinate, hoping someone else fixes the problem, while the defective, highly motivated philosophies rush in to seize power.
He says to overcome this, you need what he calls intellectual intuitional strength to work for the self and for society.
Intellectual intuitional strength.
You have to be completely, vividly wide awake to the historical moment. You need the intellectual strength to understand systems like PROUT, progressive utilization theory, and the intuitional spiritual strength to apply them with love.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, how does this all tie into the broader ultimate role he is proposing?
Right, bringing it all home.
Sarkar makes it very clear that socioeconomic life, how we manage resources, how we structure society, is incredibly important, especially in places that are recovering from the devastation of brutal regimes. But it is not the only thing. He uses a deeply resonant metaphor to explain the relationship between the spiritual and the material. He says spiritual philosophy is the hub of the wheel.
The center.
It is the eternal, unchanging, perfectly still center of human existence. And PROUT, progressive utilization theory, is the spoke.
I love that imagery, the hub and the spoke.
Yes. PROUT, progressive utilization theory, is the practical, sturdy application that connects the spiritual hub to the outer rim of the wheel where the rubber meets the road.
Where everyday life happens.
It is the mechanism that renders vital, selfless service to suffering humanity as they move along the turbulent, constantly turning flow of daily life. By propagating genuine spirituality at the hub and implementing PROUT, progressive utilization theory, as the spokes to manage the material world equitably, humanity can be elevated from its current suffering in a very short amount of time.
That is the ultimate vision, a world moving past the psychological manipulation of dogma, past the brutal force of extreme materialism, and past the balkanizing, selfish fragmentation of modern systems.
Moving toward a rational, spiritually expansive, and ecologically balanced progressive future.
The text leaves us with a profound, undeniable sense of urgency. Sarkar stresses that time will not wait for our convenience.
Time doesn't wait.
The moment to replace these defective theories is not in some distant utopian future. It is right now. This is the most opportune moment in history. We must not wait for tomorrow.
We really can't.
And so, to you listening, we want to issue a direct appeal. Keep the best of your discussions progressive, futuristic, and optimistic. We need that energy now more than ever. We appeal to you to find out more. Dive deeply into these concepts.
Learn as much as you can.
Appeal to know more about PROUT, progressive utilization theory, and how it can practically address the crises we face. Join a PROUT study circle in your area or online.
Get connected.
And to stay connected with this expanding movement of ideas, join our YouTube channel, Sad Vibras Movement and the Next Human Project. Let's work together to make this world a better place for all to live with actual happiness and genuine justice.
And as we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to leave you with a provocative thought.
Okay, lay it on.
It is something that wasn't explicitly answered in Sarkar's text, but it builds directly on the mechanics he outlined. We know that nature abhors a vacuum, and we see global systems constantly shifting, leaving voids in their wake.
Voids everywhere.
But look closely at your own life. What is the ideological, spiritual, or mental vacuum in your own daily life right now? Where is the empty space?
That's a deep question.
And if you aren't consciously, actively filling that void with a progressive, optimistic, expanding radius of love, what subconscious dogma or self-centered anxiety is quietly rushing in to take its place?
That is a brilliant, challenging question to ponder as you go about your week. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
Keep your rationality sharp, keep your psychic radius expanding, and keep your curiosity alive. We will see you next time.